It started like any other morning at the airport. People were rushing through TSA, kids crying, someone yelling about a delayed flight, the usual mess. And right in the middle of it all, there was her. A middle-aged black woman, dressed casually. Hoodie jeans, nice suitcase. Nothing flashy. She didn't look like anyone special. At least, not to the average person. But she wasn't your average person. She walked up to the TSA line calm, confident, handed over her boarding pass and her ID. And then came him, Doug, TSA agent, mid-40s. Looked like the kind of guy who still brags about being high school quarterback. You know the type. He looked at her ID, then at her, then back at the ID. He squinted like he was doing brain surgery. "Ma'am," he said with that tone, "this ID looks a little off." She didn't even blink. "It's a federal ID," she said. "It's real." Doug smirked. "Yeah, but I've never seen one like this. You sure you didn't print this at home?" The people in line were starting to notice now. A few glances. One guy stepped back. The energy had shifted. She stayed calm. "You can scan it," she said. Doug didn't scan it. He didn't call a supervisor. He just stared at it for a second, and then, with zero hesitation, ripped it in half. Ripped it in half. Like it was a flyer someone handed out on the street. The line went dead silent. You could hear the beeping of the conveyor belt behind her. That's how quiet it got. She just stood there, staring at the two halves of her ID in his hand. And then she said something. Quiet. Calm. Almost too calm. "You've just made a huge mistake." Doug chuckled. "Oh yeah? And what mistake would that be?" At that point, most people would be yelling, demanding a supervisor, calling a lawyer. But not her. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood still, like she'd seen this kind of thing before. Probably because she had. Doug radioed someone. "Got a suspicious traveler here. Possible fake ID. Need a room." Within minutes, 2 other agents came and walked her toward the back room. She didn't resist. Just rolled her bag with one hand, still calm, still collected. But here's what nobody knew. That woman? She was Senator Marsha L. Bennett, chair of the Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight, and one of the few people in the country who actually helps decide how TSA is run. Yeah, that TSA. And the ID Doug had just torn in half was a real, government-issued Senate ID, with clearance that outranked his entire shift. But she didn't throw that in his face, because she was used to people not recognizing power when it didn't look the way they expected, especially when it came in the form of a middle-aged black woman in a hoodie. Now pause for a second. If you're watching this, let me ask you, what would you have done in her shoes? Would you have yelled? Snapped back? Demanded justice right there? Or would you have played the long game like she did? Keep watching. Because this story doesn't end in that TSA backroom. It ends on national TV, with Doug wishing he'd scanned that ID. So they walked her into one of those little back rooms with the frosted glass. You know the type, they just need to ask a few questions, but it feels like an interrogation booth from some cop drama. 2 TSA agents stood by the door, arms crossed. Doug was outside, pacing like he'd just cracked a major case. Like he caught someone trying to sneak into the CIA with a fake pass from Office Depot. Inside the room, Senator Marsha Bennett sat down, calm, like she'd been here before. She didn't fidget. She didn't sweat. She looked around slowly, like she was taking mental notes. And truth is, she was, because she didn't just sit on any Senate committee. She was one of the lead voices on transportation security oversight. She knew every policy, every protocol, every loophole. She also knew that none of these people had run her ID through the actual federal scanner. They just saw a black woman with a serious face and assumed the worst. Now, while they stalled inside, something else was happening outside. A woman in a navy blue blazer sprinted through the terminal, laptop bag bouncing on her side, phone in hand. This was Camille, Senator Bennett's chief of staff. She had one job that day: stay behind the scenes and meet her boss at the gate with documents for an unannounced inspection. But when Marsha didn't show at the gate and didn't answer her phone, Camille knew something had gone wrong. And unfortunately, it wasn't the first time. She headed straight to security. Have you seen a middle-aged black woman? Name's Marsha Lewis on the ID? The TSA agent shrugged. Taken in for ID issues, he said. Might have been fake. Camille's eyes widened. You got to be kidding me. Back in the room, one of the younger agents pulled out a tablet. "We're trying to verify your identity," he said, almost sounding apologetic. She nodded. "All right, let me help." And then she did something that made both agents freeze. She recited the internal TSA protocol code, word for word. She even quoted the section that detailed how federal IDs should be scanned, not eyeballed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lecture, just stated facts. The agents exchanged a glance. "Ma'am," one of them asked, "are you some kind of lawyer?" She gave a slight smile. "Close." They kept pressing. "Why are you flying under a different last name?" She leaned in. "Because when you're a black woman in politics, sometimes it's safer to leave the title behind." The room went quiet, and then Camille burst through the door. "I need to speak to your supervisor." Now, she flashed her badge as Senate aide clearance and handed the agent an envelope. Inside, a second ID, the real one, with Senator Marsha L. Bennett printed at the top, complete with a U.S. Senate hologram. The agent holding the tablet turned pale. He looked up at Marsha, then back at the ID, then over at Camille. Then he opened the door and called for supervisor. Outside, Doug finally heard the whispering. "Wait," he said. "She's a what?" "A senator," one of the junior agents replied. Doug's face turned the color of expired milk. That's when it clicked. He didn't just tear up a woman's ID. He tore up a sitting U.S. senator's federal credentials and racially profiled a high-ranking government official on camera. Because, yes, one of the travelers in line had filmed the entire thing. Let's pause again, because here's the real question. If she wasn't a senator, if she didn't have backup IDs and a team, would anyone have believed her? Would anyone have cared? Or would she have just been that angry black woman at security? But now, the game had changed. Doug wasn't the one in control anymore. And what happened next? That part went public. Still watching? Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's show how far this story is traveling. And if this is making your blood boil just a little, hit that like button. You won't believe what happens next. You ever see someone get real quiet, right before everything flips? That's exactly what was happening now. Senator Marsha Bennett sat in that room like nothing had fazed her. Because the truth is, this wasn't new. This wasn't even the first time someone tried to shrink her down to what they thought she was. Let's rewind for a second. Before she was the woman in that TSA chair, before she had federal clearance and a Senate badge, she was a high school teacher in Detroit. One of those teachers who bought extra notebooks with her own money because half her class couldn't afford school supplies. The kind who stayed after school helping students fill out FAFSA forms, even though she had 2 kids of her own waiting at home. People didn't see her back then either. She was just Miss B, the woman who always had snacks in her desk drawer. But over the years, she fought her way into politics, not through donors or family name, but by showing up to every town hall, every community cleanup, every city budget meeting most people ignored. And when they told her she didn't look polished enough for politics, she ran anyway. She won her first race by 147 votes. The next year, she won by thousands. And now, she was a U.S. Senator, chair of the committee that literally oversees transportation security. The same system that just tried to humiliate her. Back in the TSA room, the supervisor had arrived, and he wasn't smiling. He held the Senate ID, scanned it through the proper system, and the screen lit up green. Federal clearance. Active. Then he looked at Doug, who'd walked in behind him, trying to play cool. "Is the ID you tore up?" Doug looked down. "But I didn't know she was." The supervisor raised a hand. "That's not the point." He turned to Senator Bennett. "Ma'am, on behalf of TSA, I apologize. This should never have happened." But she didn't nod. She didn't accept the apology. She just asked one question. "Is your body come on?" That's when Doug really started sweating. Because now it wasn't just about a bad call. Now it was about documentation. And she knew the rules. She pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and started listing the names on their badges. Calm, collected, and now clearly in control. You know what's funny? Doug still didn't understand the gravity of what he'd done. He didn't just tear up an ID. He tore up the credibility of the entire screening system in front of someone who had the power to change it. But let's talk about the real issue here. What if she hadn't been a senator? What if she didn't have Camille running through terminals with backup ID? What if there was no camera, no status, no badge? She'd be another name in a system full of random checks that somehow always seemed to target the same people. And that's exactly why she didn't just walk away. She wasn't here to make a scene. She was here to make a statement. And the next step wouldn't happen in that airport. It would happen on Capitol Hill. By the time she left that room, Doug looked like he wanted to disappear. The supervisor escorted her personally to the gate, full apology mode. The gate agent suddenly got very polite. "Would you like to pre-board, Senator?" She just smiled. "No need. I'll wait with everyone else." Because that was the whole point. She was everyone else. She just happened to have a platform loud enough to make sure they listened. On the plane, Camille leaned in. "You okay?" Senator Bennett stared out the window for a second, then said, "No, but I will be. And so will a lot of people once we're done with this." Still with us? Drop a comment with your city. Let's show how far this story is reaching. The plane had barely taken off when the video hit the internet. A teenager in line at TSA had filmed the entire thing on his phone, not because he knew she was, but because something about the way that agent tore up her ID didn't sit right. He posted it with the caption, "TSA agent just ripped this lady's ID and said she looked suspicious." Why she handled it like a boss, though? Eyes. By the time Marcia landed in Atlanta, the clip had gone viral. 2.1 million views. And in the comments, people started recognizing her. "Wait, isn't that Senator Bennett? Yo, that's the Transportation Committee lady? Bro ripped a senator's ID? TSA about to get audited? LMAO." And just like that, everything changed. Back in D.C., Doug was called into a meeting the moment his shift ended. The airport's press office had been flooded. News outlets were already circling. And someone from the Senate Oversight Committee was asking for official reports. Doug tried to play it off. "I didn't recognize her. She wasn't dressed like a senator." But that excuse wasn't going to fly, because the truth was on camera. And it wasn't about what she was wearing. It was about how quick he was to assume she didn't belong. Meanwhile, Senator Bennett didn't say a word on social media. No tweet, no press release. She just let the story speak for itself. The video showed her calm, composed, never aggressive. And that silence spoke louder than anything. 3 days later, she stepped into a Senate chamber, blazer crisp, eyes focused, and called for a public hearing on TSA accountability, racial bias, and procedural misuse. She didn't name Doug. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room had seen the clip. She opened her remarks with a single sentence. "Let's talk about what happens when you don't look like power." Then she laid out the numbers. How black and brown travelers are disproportionately randomly screened. How federal IDs often aren't recognized, not because they're fake, but because they don't match someone's idea of what real looks like. How agents are rarely retrained after misconduct, and almost never held publicly accountable. By the end of the hearing, it wasn't just a room that was quiet. It was the internet. People weren't just angry anymore. They were paying attention. News anchors debated it. Airport employees shared similar stories anonymously. And other passengers, people who had once been brushed aside or laughed off, started speaking up. It was like a floodgate opened, all because one woman decided to stay calm and record everything, not with a phone, but with her presence. As for Doug, he was suspended pending investigation. Some people online defended him. He was just doing his job. He didn't know. But most people saw it for what it was. Not a mistake, but a pattern. And this time, the pattern got exposed. Senator Bennett didn't gloat, didn't make it about revenge. She just made it clear it was never about her. It was about the people who don't get the benefit of the doubt. The ones without Senate IDs or staff or backup. The everyday flyers who walk through airports and get treated like they're invisible, or worse, like they're dangerous. And that's when the story really hit home, because people didn't see a politician anymore. They saw their mom, their sister, their friend, themselves. The change didn't happen overnight. It never does. But policies started shifting. Retraining sessions were announced. And Doug? He didn't come back. Marcia flew out of that same airport a few weeks later. This time, the TSA agents nodded politely, smiled even, but she didn't smile back. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here to make sure no one else had to walk through fire just to get on a plane. A week later, the hearing room was packed. Senators, reporters, cameras, even airport staff tuning in on breakroom TVs. This wasn't just another routine session. This one had weight, and sitting at the center of it all, calm, straight-backed, with a folder of notes she probably didn't even need, was Senator Marsha L. Bennett. No hoodie today, navy blazer, flag pin, reading glasses low on her nose. But same woman, same composure. The room hushed as she leaned forward and adjusted the mic. Good afternoon. Today's hearing is on racial bias in federal security screenings, specifically the Transportation Security Administration's protocols, accountability procedures, and failure to identify their own blind spots. No grandstanding, no shouting. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just spoke, and the room listened. She started with the numbers. Black travelers are more than twice as likely to be pulled aside for additional screening. Latino passengers? Same story. Muslim passengers? Don't even get me started. Yet when complaints are filed, over 90% are dismissed without follow-up. And when misconduct happens, the agents often stay on the job. Slide after slide, fact after fact. Every word was aimed like a scalpel. And then she did something bold. She requested to play a video, not the viral clip that was already on everyone's phones. No, this was body cam footage. Footage TSA didn't expect her to get. But as a member of the Oversight Committee, she had access. On the screen, Doug could be heard saying, "She doesn't look like no senator." That one sentence sucked the air out of the room. She paused the clip, looked around, then said, "Let's be honest. This isn't about one man. This is about an entire system that doesn't recognize authority unless it fits a mold." What happened next wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. She introduced a bill, a small one, a starter, the Federal Traveler Protection Act. It outlined new training, stricter reporting requirements, and clear consequences for agents who misuse authority based on race, religion, or gender presentation. It wasn't just symbolic. It had teeth. And when she finished presenting it, 2 more senators, one Republican, one independent, agreed to co-sponsor it. That's when you knew. This wasn't just about going viral. It was about real change. Meanwhile, Doug was subpoenaed. He didn't come to the hearing in uniform. He showed up in a suit, nervous, sweating, stumbling through his opening statement. He called it a misunderstanding, said he was following protocol. But under questioning, his answers fell apart fast. "Did you scan her ID?" "No." "Why not?" "I didn't think it was real." "Based on what?" Doug paused, swallowed hard. Just didn't seem like someone like her would have that kind of ID. There it was, on record. The headline the next morning: TSA agent admits to racial profiling U.S. Senator in Senate hearing. That afternoon, Doug submitted his resignation. But the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone who came after. People started coming forward, quietly, through email, social media, even handwritten letters. Black teachers, hijabi women, disabled veterans. All of them had been pulled aside, questioned, made to feel small. And now, they had a voice in the room. Because someone who looked like them wasn't just in power. She was using it. A week later, Senator Bennett stood in a classroom back in Detroit, the very school where she used to teach. She looked out at a room full of seniors, most of them black, most of them unsure of what the world had waiting for them. She told them the whole story, not to scare them, but to prepare them. And then she said, "You might not be believed. You might be underestimated. But stay calm, stay sharp, and remember, your power doesn't disappear just because someone can't see it." No applause, no mic drop, just quiet understanding, and maybe a little hope. It had been 4 months. New TSA policies were in place, new training, new oversight, and still felt like no one really knew what would happen when Marsha Bennett finally returned to that same airport. But she did. Same terminal, same time of morning, same suitcase, same calm walk through the crowd. This time, though, something was different. Not because she was now recognizable, though that was true. Not because there were whispers or stares, though there were a few, but because for once she didn't feel like she was walking into a trap. She approached the TSA line. Different staff this time. Younger. More alert. The agent glanced up at her ID, scanned it properly this time, and immediately nodded. "Thank you, Senator. Have a safe flight." No awkward pauses. No side eyes. Just professionalism. She smiled. Not a smug smile. Not even a proud one. Just peaceful. Like maybe, for once, the system had taken a step forward. She walked through the scanner, grabbed her bag, and paused for a moment near the seating area. Looked out over the crowd. Families. Business travelers. Students. All just trying to get somewhere. And she thought about how many of them still wouldn't be believed. Still wouldn't be recognized. Still wouldn't be treated like they belonged. Because the truth? This wasn't about one woman. This wasn't even about one airport. It was about how the world reacts when authority comes in a form they didn't expect. A black woman. Alone. Calm. Unbothered. And that's what scared them the most. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to call the media. She didn't even need revenge. She had something stronger. Documentation. Discipline. Patience. And most of all, she had the truth. When she boarded the plane, she took the window seat, pulled out a book, Something by Baldwin, and as the plane rolled down the runway, she didn't look back. She didn't need to, because the next time someone like Doug goes to tear up someone's identity, he'll think twice. And maybe, just maybe, he'll hesitate long enough to remember this story. This story isn't just hers. It's for everyone who's ever been treated like they didn't belong and refused to back down. Let it remind you, you don't always have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful statement is silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us, where are you watching from? Let's keep this message moving.